What happens when a high-profile guest suddenly loses control during a live television interview, pushing the host into a corner where he has no choice but to make a decision so shocking that it leaves millions of viewers completely stunned. This isn't just another awkward TV moment. This is one of the most jaw-dropping, unpredictable, and unforgettable incidents in morning television history. Michael Strahan had been hosting Good Morning America for years, and at this point in his career, he believed he had truly seen everything. He had endured unpredictable guests who refused to answer questions, celebrities who stormed off the set mid-interview, technical disasters that left dead air on national TV, and even moments where the teleprompter completely failed him. Yet, for all his experience and professionalism, nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what he was about to face on this particular morning. The excitement had been building for days. The producers were ecstatic when they managed to book Meghan Markle for an exclusive interview. This was a kind of guest that guaranteed headlines, social media buzz, and a rating spike. The plan was simple. Meghan would appear, promote her latest projects, touch on her humanitarian work, and maybe drop a few shareable sound bites that would dominate the news cycle. On the surface, it was supposed to be safe, controlled, and perfectly manageable. Behind the scenes, everything seemed to confirm that. Meghan arrived on time, radiating composure. She breezed through the hair and makeup process without incident, greeting staff with warmth and offering polite small talk. Her publicist handed over the standard list of pre-approved topics, nothing too controversial, nothing that could spark trouble. To everyone in the studio, it looked like a flawless setup. The set itself had been prepared with meticulous care. 2 comfortable chairs angled just enough for natural conversation, while keeping both participants perfectly framed by the cameras. A small table sat between them, decorated with fresh flowers for a touch of warmth. Sunlight poured through the studio windows, bathing the scene in a calm, golden glow. As Michael sat in the makeup chair reviewing his notes, he felt the same pre-show buzz he had felt 1,000 times before. Crew members adjusted the lighting, tested the microphones, and made their final checks. Everything pointed toward a routine, polished interview. When Meghan took her seat, she adjusted her outfit, checked her reflection in the monitor, and smiled warmly as the sound technician clipped the microphone onto her lapel. She looked calm, confident, perfectly prepared. Michael, as always, slipped into his polished professional mode. His charisma, his easy smile, his commanding presence, it was all second nature by now. The countdown hit 0, the cameras went live, and he welcomed viewers the way he always did, with warmth and energy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Strahan, and today we are joined by a very special guest. His introduction was flawless, and Meghan returned his greeting with that same polished tone the world had come to expect. Thank you for having me, Michael. I'm delighted to be here. The opening minutes went exactly as expected. Michael asked about her charitable work, her upcoming projects, and her perspectives on various social issues. Meghan's answers were articulate, carefully measured, and clearly designed to hit the right notes. She spoke with ease, her body language relaxed, her voice steady. Behind the cameras, the producers were pleased, everything was running smoothly, and the segment was shaping up to be a success. The mood in the studio was light, relaxed, and optimistic. But then, with what seemed like a harmless follow-up question, everything changed. Michael asked her about her experiences working with different media outlets, and how she adapts her approach depending on who she's speaking to. On the surface, it was an innocent query, one that countless guests had fielded before. But as Meghan prepared to respond, something in her expression shifted. Her smile faded. Her tone dropped to something sharper, heavier. The warmth that had filled the room just moments earlier was gone. Well, Michael, she began, her voice carrying a new, unmistakable edge. Not all interviews are created equal. And frankly, not all interviewers are capable of handling conversations that truly matter. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Michael, ever the professional, raised his eyebrows slightly but maintained composure. Guests sometimes criticize the media. It wasn't unusual, but the pointedness of a comment sent a ripple of unease through the studio. He leaned in slightly, curious, hoping to turn it into a productive discussion. That's an interesting perspective, Meghan, he said smoothly. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? What makes for a more effective interview dynamic in your experience? But instead of offering a thoughtful, constructive answer, Meghan doubled down. Her expression hardened. She leaned forward in her chair, her voice lower, more deliberate. What I mean is that there are interviewers who truly understand complex issues, and then there are those who are better suited for, shall we say, lighter conversations. Sports commentary, for instance, is a very different skill set than discussing matters of genuine social importance. The air in the studio grew heavy. Behind the cameras, the producers exchanged worried glances. They knew this was no longer a controlled conversation. This was a live confrontation unfolding before millions of viewers. The crew shifted uncomfortably. The tension was undeniable. Michael, drawing on years of live TV experience, responded calmly but firmly, refusing to let the moment spin out of control. I appreciate that perspective, Meghan, but I'd argue that many of us in broadcasting have had the opportunity to cover a wide range of subjects. That's the beauty of this platform. We get to learn from our guests and bring those conversations to the world. But Meghan wasn't finished. Instead of easing back, she pressed forward with even more intensity. Her voice grew sharper. Her eyes locked on Michael as she accused mainstream shows of oversimplifying complex issues, of treating everything as if it were on the same level of importance, and of failing to respect the weight of conversations that truly impact people's lives. The tension was unbearable. Viewers at home could feel it. The crew behind the cameras could feel it. Michael, despite his composure, could feel the pressure building second by second. What happened next would push him into making a split-second decision that no one, not the producers, not the audience, not even Meghan herself, saw coming. And that decision would go down in television history. Primary experience is discussing batting averages and touchdown passes. Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but years of professional training kicked in. He had handled difficult guests before, but never someone who had so blatantly insulted his background and capabilities on live television. The camera operators froze, unsure whether to cut away or keep rolling, their lenses still locked on the tense exchange. The studio, usually alive with whispers, cues, and quiet shuffling, had gone completely silent except for the low hum of the equipment and the rising sharpness in Meghan's tone. "Meghan, I think there might be some misunderstanding here," Michael replied, his voice steady despite the obvious provocation. "We invited you here today to have a respectful conversation about your work and initiatives. I'm not sure where this hostility is coming from, but perhaps we could refocus on the topics you'd like to discuss." Instead of easing the tension, Meghan seemed to interpret Michael's diplomatic response as weakness. She leaned back in her chair, gesturing dismissively, shaking her head as though disappointed in his lack of engagement. Her voice rose again, cutting like a blade. "This is exactly what I mean, Michael. This inability to engage with challenging ideas, this immediate retreat to safe, superficial topics when a conversation starts to get real. It's precisely this kind of intellectual timidity that makes certain media personalities unsuitable for serious discourse." The insult was no longer subtle. It was unmistakable, and the air in the studio felt like it could snap. Michael's co-hosts, watching from their desks across the set, stared in disbelief, their mouths slightly open. The floor director waved his arms frantically, trying to catch the attention of the control room, silently pleading for someone to decide whether to cut to commercial or let the train wreck continue to play out live. Michael drew a deep breath, fighting the pull between his professionalism and his natural human reaction to being disrespected so openly. His career had been built on grace under pressure, on finding ways to bring even the most chaotic interviews back to civility. But this was different. This was personal. He knew that if he allowed Meghan's attacks to continue unchecked, the damage would extend far beyond the segment. It would undermine not just his own credibility, but the entire show. Finally, Michael straightened, his voice firmer now, though still controlled. "Meghan, I'm going to stop you right there. I have been nothing but respectful to you since you walked into this studio, and I extended an invitation for you to share your message with our viewers. What you're doing right now is not only unprofessional, but it's also disrespectful to everyone who works on this show and to the millions of people watching at home." For a fleeting moment, it seemed like his directness might pull things back from the edge. But instead of softening, Meghan only seemed to grow more agitated. Her posture shifted, her tone sharpened, her eyes locked on Michael like she was ready for battle. "Disrespectful," she repeated, her voice rising just enough to carry a sting. What's disrespectful, Michael, is pretending that all opinions and all expertise are equally valuable. What's disrespectful is forcing someone like me, who has actually lived through significant experiences and has real insights, to pretend that surface-level questions and lightweight commentary constitute meaningful journalism. Michael felt the loss of his patience slipping, but still he made one final attempt to salvage the wreckage. Meghan, if you have specific topics you'd like to discuss, or if there are particular questions you feel would be more valuable, I'm happy to pivot this conversation in that direction. But what I won't do is sit here and allow you to continue insulting me, my background, or the work that everyone here does every single day. His reasonable offer, instead of cooling the tension, seemed to fuel her determination further. Meghan leaned forward again, eyes narrowing into a challenge, her voice gaining weight with every word. You see, this is exactly the problem with people in your position, Michael. You think that offering to change the subject somehow solves a fundamental issue here, but it doesn't. The issue isn't about topics, it's about competence. You can't just pivot away from the fact that you're out of your depth when it comes to discussing matters of real substance. This isn't about questions. This is about intellectual capacity. The studio fell into a suffocating silence. Even the quiet mechanical work cameras seemed to fade as every single person on set processed what had just been said. Michael's expression, so carefully maintained throughout his career, finally cracked. His diplomatic patience gave way to a flash of something raw, a sharp edge of anger breaking through. He leaned forward, his voice lower now, but pulsing with controlled intensity. Are you seriously questioning my intellectual capacity on live television? Are you actually sitting here, as a guest on my show, suggesting that I'm intellectually inferior to you? The words hit the air like a live wire. And instead of backing down, instead of realizing how far she had pushed, Meghan doubled down again. She leaned back in her chair with a smug half-smile, her tone dripping with condescension. I'm not suggesting anything, Michael. I'm stating it clearly. There are people who are capable of handling complex, nuanced discussions about real issues, and there are people who are better suited for lighter fare. There's nothing wrong with knowing your limitations. But there's something very wrong with pretending those limitations don't exist. Michael stared at her for a long moment, his jaw set, his eyes burning, and everyone watching, whether in the studio or at home, could feel the ground shifting toward a breaking point that no one had ever seen on Good Morning America before. See him making a decision. His jaw was tight, his hands gripped the arms of his chair, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight and authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the studio. Let me tell you something, Meghan, and I want you to listen very carefully because this is important. I've been in broadcasting for over 2 decades. I've covered everything from natural disasters to political elections, from human interest stories to breaking news that changed the world. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel Prize winners, activists, artists, and yes, athletes too, because guess what? They are human beings with stories worth telling. Meghan tried to interrupt, but Michael raised his hand sharply and continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident with each passing word. You walked into the studio as my guest, and I treated you with nothing but respect and professionalism. I prepared thoughtful questions. I gave you a platform to share your message. I've been patient even as you spent the last several minutes insulting not just me, but everyone who works on this show. And now you've crossed a line by questioning my intellectual capacity. The control room was a frenzy of voices, producers debating whether to cut to commercial or let it play out. But no one wanted to interrupt, because they all knew they were witnessing television history in real time. The camera stayed locked on Michael as he stood from his chair, his towering frame casting a shadow over Meghan, who suddenly looked much smaller and less certain than she had moments before. His movement was calm but deliberate, and when he spoke again, the studio went silent, every word ringing with finality. I've had enough of this, Meghan. This interview is over. Not because I can't handle difficult conversations or challenging topics, but because I refuse to provide a platform for someone who believes that being disrespectful and insulting constitutes intelligent discourse. You're done here. For the first time since the segment began, Meghan looked rattled. The smug certainty drained from her face, replaced by a flicker of doubt. She glanced around the studio as if searching for support, but every crew member, Every producer, even Michael's co-host watching from the desk, wore the same stunned expression. No one was on her side. "You can't just end an interview because you don't like what I'm saying," she protested weakly, her voice carrying far less bite than before. "This is supposed to be a professional conversation." Michael didn't hesitate. His response was crisp, sharp, and impossible to argue with. "You're absolutely right. Meghan, this was supposed to be a professional conversation. But you chose to make it something else. You turned it into a personal attack. You insulted my intelligence, my background, and my capabilities, all while sitting as a guest on my show. That's not professional discourse. That's cruelty wrapped in arrogance." The tension in the studio hit its peak, the air so heavy it felt suffocating. Meghan's composure cracked further. Her eyes darted toward the cameras, as if realizing that millions of viewers were seeing her unravel. "Michael, I think you're overreacting," she stammered, her tone desperate now. "We're having a spirited discussion about important issues. Isn't that what good television is supposed to be? Challenging conversations that push boundaries." Michael shook his head slowly, his gaze unwavering. He had reached his limit, and there was no coming back. "No, Meghan," he said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of years of earned authority. "That's not what this was. A spirited discussion involves mutual respect and good faith. What you did was launch personal attacks disguised as intellectual superiority. You didn't challenge my ideas or my questions. You attacked me. There's a world of difference between those two things." Meghan tried one last time to seize control of the narrative, but the attempt was hollow, her words collapsing under the weight of the moment. "I was simply trying to elevate the conversation beyond superficial pleasantries," she insisted. "Sometimes real progress requires uncomfortable honesty about limitations." Michael leaned forward slightly, his voice cutting through the silence with devastating clarity. "Uncomfortable honesty? Is that what you call it when you suggest that my background in sports makes me unfit to speak with you? Is that your version of elevating conversation, by standing on a pedestal and telling millions of viewers that their host is intellectually inferior simply because he once called a touchdown pass?" The entire studio froze. Meghan's confidence, once unshakable, evaporated before everyone's eyes. And in that moment, it was clear that Michael's decision to end the interview wasn't just about shutting down an out-of-control guest. It was about drawing a line in the sand, reclaiming the respect that had been under attack, and showing the world that no one, not even Meghan Markle, could walk into his house, disrespect him, and expect to walk away unchallenged. Conversation, telling me that I lacked the capacity for meaningful journalism? Because from where I'm standing, that sounds less like uncomfortable honesty and more like arrogance and disrespect. And the studio went dead silent except for their voices as camera operators kept rolling, knowing instinctively they were capturing a moment that would be replayed for years. Behind the cameras, producers scrambled, whispering frantically about whether to cut or let it ride. But Meghan tried one last desperate pivot, her once sharp confidence replaced by a pleading tone. "Michael, please, I think we're both a little heated. Maybe we should step back, find some common ground. I didn't mean to offend you personally." But Michael was done with diplomacy. His expression was steel, his voice loaded with finality as he declared, "Meghan, the time for finding common ground was when you first sat in that chair. You had a choice, respect this platform and the people who work here, or make it personal and insulting, and you chose wrong. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, controversial voices who disagreed with me completely, but those conversations worked because they were rooted in respect. What happened here today was not that." Meghan opened her mouth, but he cut her off, his tone firm and unshakable. "You questioned my intellect. You dismissed my career. You implied I was unfit to conduct this interview, or while using my platform, my audience. That's not discourse, that's bad behavior, and I will not tolerate it." His voice made it clear this was over, but Meghan, stunned, whispered, "So what happens now? You're really cutting this short because you don't like my tone." Michael didn't blink. "What happens now is that you leave. This segment is done. You had more chances than you deserve to act with professionalism, and you threw everyone away. You're not getting another." The words landed like a gavel strike. For a moment, Meghan just sat there frozen, the weight of reality dawning on her. When she finally rose, her movements were stiff, awkward, Nothing like the commanding presence she had projected earlier. "This is unprecedented," she sputtered, a mix of shock and indignation in her voice. "I've never been treated like this in an interview." Michael's calm reply was devastating. "Maybe that's because you've never behaved this way before. Or maybe others were willing to tolerate what I won't. Either way, this conversation is finished." With that, security discreetly shadowed her as she gathered her things and walked out, the studio still charged with an electric silence. Michael then turned to the camera, his face softening but his voice still resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue with the rest of today's show. Sometimes live television doesn't go as planned, but we will always uphold the respect and professionalism you deserve as our viewers." The camera held on his face for a beat longer, capturing the weight of what had just happened before fading to commercial, leaving the studio frozen in disbelief of the history they had just witnessed. "And now I'll throw it to you. What do you think of Michael Strahan's handling of this impossible situation? Was he right to shut it down, or should he have found another way? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more.